The bill essentially sets out to replace the apartheid-era law around state secrecy with a new law, which is in itself a good idea. Clearly the current dispensation isn't adequate, and it reflects far too much the paranoid preoccupations of the apartheid government. However, strangely, what the new legislation actually does is vastly to broaden the ambit of secrecy legislation, and in fact requires of government officials across the spectrum, whether they're councillors in a rural area or DGs in the Defence Department, that they classify a huge range of information, and that they do so not in a narrowly defined and careful way dealing with national security, but in the very, very broad sense dealing with what is called national interest. And our concern is that this will draw a veil of secrecy over such a broad range of the workings of the state that it will completely vitiate the freedom of information provisions and the open democracy provisions in our constitution. To make matters worse, the bill criminalizes both the leaking of and the receiving of classified information, and it imposes very heavy prison terms for everyone along that chain of the leak. So if you're a journalist and in receipt, say, of a tender document, which has now become classified in terms of these new rules, you could be liable for a very lengthy jail term if you don't immediately walk down the road to your nearest police station and hand it over. I certainly think that frustration with the ability of the press to show up bad performance and corruption has allowed the process to be diverted in a political direction that it was never originally intended to go in. The Browse Mole story, which dealt with a report that showed how the Scorpions were gathering intelligence in relation to Jacob Zuma's plans to further his political ambitions, certainly wouldn't have been made public. In fact, the very telecommunications intercepts which allowed Jacob Zuma to argue that his case was being politically influenced by the head of the Scorpions, then Leonard McCarthy and Bulelani Ngcuka, would never have been made available to him, or indeed if they had, then his lawyers would have had to be locked up. But it goes to much simpler things than that as well. For example, our Oilgate expose, which dealt with the way that the state oil trading company was financing the governing party, probably wouldn't have been possible. What's happened in recent weeks is that an African National Congress proposal to create a statutory media appeals tribunal, as they call it, has been revived. This is a proposal that got a little bit of airtime around Polokwane when there was a strong feeling in the party that the media was attacking its preferred candidate for the presidency, Jacob Zuma. And the idea was that media self-regulation through the Press Council and media regulation through the courts and the common law wasn't good enough, and that we needed to create a body accountable to Parliament that would regulate media conduct. That seemed to quieten down and die away in the first year of the Zuma administration, but it's now come back with a vengeance. And bizarrely, it's done so at a time when the media has been almost excessively positive during the period of the World Cup. So the suggestion now is that they would like to see penalties imposed on what they see as bad journalism, ranging from large fines to jail sentences. Look, I think it's important to note that we as media have to do better in terms of quality, in terms of ethics, and in terms of getting it right. But that is not in itself a basis for creating a structure that effectively would provide political oversight of journalists' work. A robust independent media is actually a foundational characteristic of a free society, and our constitution sees it as such, and specifically enjoins us to do the work that we do. So also there are powerful mechanisms that exist at the moment for dealing with bad journalism, whether they are self-regulation processes or civil law processes, and I think people need to take very seriously the urgency of this threat, not just for us as journalists, but for the whole society, ultimately, we would like to think we serve.